Hosanna in the highest. It's a celebration day, right? Yeah, that music, it's so triumphant. It's no wonder the disciples thought this has got to be the end of the journey, right? We've been on the hero's journey for those of you who worship with us weekly. Oh, this is the triumphant day, right? The Messiah has arrived. This was a big deal. In Judaism, the arrival of the Messiah means the salvation of the Hebrew people. And for many, both then and now, it's to be a triumphant return of a warrior king. And sometimes when we do Palm Sunday, we think of it that way. It would be nice if this were the end of the story. But if you know the story, you know this is just the beginning of Holy Week. This triumphant entry is more than just a parade. It's the beginning of the journey to the cross. But we kind of want to stick with the Palm Sunday thing, right? Because everybody loves a parade. It's so much more fun to be in the parade. But let me tell you what was happening across town. It was the beginning of Passover week all over Jerusalem, then as now, the holy city for Judaism. For most of us as Christians, we would consider it the holy city. And Rome didn't like that so much. Trust me, they only wanted Rome to be the holy city, and there were no Catholics in Rome in those days. There were just Roman soldiers. But these little usurpers in Jerusalem, these Hebrew people who, legend had it, had escaped Egyptian slavery in the days of the pharaohs, were always trying to sneak around the Roman rules. And so the Roman governor of that part of the Roman Empire had a tradition. Pilate would get together his own parade. He didn't know there was a Jesus parade happening at the other end of town, and Jesus couldn't have competed anyway. Nope, Pilate entered on a mighty war horse, as all Roman soldiers did in their parades, surrounded by other Roman warriors and warrior horses and chariots, and probably some women in some very scantily clothed things, and all the Roman soldiers in their finery. Now that was a parade of power. And Pilate wasn't coming to show respect and reverence for the celebration of Passover. He was coming to protect the Roman Empire with swords and knives and shields and giant horses that could mow down any crowds that got out of control, any scribes and Pharisees who would dare to object to his leadership or to the godliness of Caesar, who was considered a god in the Roman Empire. Jesus' parade, triumphant as we make it, was a much humbler affair. Palm branches and people's personal cloaks strewn on the dusty streets of Jerusalem as he entered from a gate at the opposite end of town. He enters on a colt, a small donkey, representing more humility than power, more a man of the people than a man above the people. Have you ever ridden a donkey? Not an easy thing to do, and it doesn't make you very tall. This parade reminds us of something different. But it's so easy to get caught up in it. And it was no different for Jesus' disciples. They got caught up in it too. No wonder they get confused in the days ahead when Jesus starts turning over tables in the temple. This is going to be nothing but trouble, right? But he does it anyway. And then he keeps talking about his impending death. It's a confusing week for them. They honestly did not know this would be the week of his death. Passover is a big deal. You celebrate the Exodus, the escape from Egypt, the power of the Hebrew people because of God's power to escape oppression underneath an evil empire. There they are once again living underneath an evil empire. And somewhere in their heart of hearts, they're hoping this Moses will part the Red Sea and win the power back so that Jerusalem would no longer be occupied by Roman soldiers, but would be instead led by Jewish leaders and ultimately by their Messiah. No wonder they love this parade. No wonder we love this parade. It's so tempting to get caught up in this vision of Jesus. Lest you think this is just my opinion, what, Neil, did we go through about a dozen Palm Sunday videos? All of which I said I want something about the kingship of Jesus being about servanthood. They weren't out there. I had to pick a poem because a poet knows this. But all of the Christian videos we could find were triumphant King Jesus, as if we're going to win the world with a war. And trust me, my friends, part of the reason our world is constantly at war is because religions around the world, across all religious beliefs, get this confused about our religions all the time. Confucianism has done it, Buddhism has done it, Judaism does it, Islam does it, Christianity does it. We fought some of the most horrific wars during the Crusades, allegedly in the name of winning the world for Christ. This is not us at our best. This is us trying to climb up on a giant war horse and become Pilate. Really? Do we want to be Pontius Pilate? Do we even want to be Caesar Augustus at the end of the day? Okay, maybe sometimes. I will admit, my mom and I, many times used to sit around the dinner table talking about the state of the world and say, well, if they would put us two girls in charge, we'd solve this problem. And we did mean in total tyrannical, dictatorial charge. And we would laugh. But I have to nervously admit, behind the laughter, there was a bit of a yearning. Anyone who's called to leadership has probably sometimes known that temptation, that yearning. Like, if I could just tell you what to do, make you do it my way, then we'd be okay. And that's kind of what the disciples wanted from Jesus, because let's face it, he could have come into there. He could have marched into the Pantheon, wiped out the Romans. He could have declared a war, probably wiped out the Romans. There were a lot of Jews in Jerusalem that week. And he would have been a very different kind of king. But I venture to say the world wouldn't be any different. What has made the world different under Jesus' leadership is that he redefined leadership. He said to a world so in love with our yearning for power and prestige and worldly success that the only thing that ultimately defines us is loving service. He turned it all on his head and said, on its head, and said, servant leadership is the only leadership that is truly leadership of God. And it is the only leadership that will transform the world. And that means leading from the bottom up. That means humbling himself, not just to the point of death on a cross, that comes at the end of the week, but humbling himself at the parade. I think his friends could have probably managed to kidnap one of those Roman war horses. They were a bunch of, especially Simon the Zealot, he would have found a way. And he wanted a war anyway. Judas would have bought one because he had that coin purse. But no, he enters on a colt over a bed of palm leaves and people's cloaks. They threw their cloaks on the ground. Their own servant leadership, allowing their cloaks to get dusty and dirty, that they might honor this man who ultimately would be their servant king, not their worldly king. Servant leadership is what sets us apart from the worldly leaders. And when servant leadership sets them apart, our world is a better place. And we've seen it occasionally. I think about the way in which leaders tried to lead during World War II, working together despite their many political differences across the globe, finding ways to try to keep it safe from a group of leaders who wanted to be those tyrannical dictators. We can do servant leadership if we remember that the parade that our leaders started with was not a parade of triumph of the world's power, but a parade of triumph of love's power. It's so important to keep this in mind because, oh man, we are so tempted by the world to go the other direction. Probably tempted by our own souls to go the other direction, although we don't like to admit it. But when we fall into that temptation, we end up supporting the very leaders who are destroying us. It's so tempting. We just want somebody to solve it. We just want somebody to make it better. No wonder the disciples just wanted Jesus to come in and grab a sword. Later on, at his arrest, this very week, one of them is going to grab a sword and cut off a Roman soldier's ear. They were hoping for it. And I know sometimes we're kind of hoping for it, like, I want in the next election the bad guy to lose and the good guy to win. As if we even know what that means. What if the job is for us to be leading and making the world better each and every day from now until the next election? What if our job is to be serving others first rather than serving ourselves first? What if our job is to reach out for help and realize I can't go it alone? Who was I to think I could? Even Jesus didn't. There's so much going on in our world that it's easy to get discouraged, to fall into despair. I read all these articles about the rise in mental illness amongst our culture, amongst all age groups, and the rising sense of loneliness and isolation. And most of the articles I read, they aren't very helpful. They're full of hand-wringing and worry, and everybody just needs to get off their cell phones and everything will be better, as if that were our problem. But I read an article this week in Worship Leader magazine. It's in my notes. I think his name's Mike Koloff. But I so appreciated his perspective. He said, Jesus is the solution to that loneliness and exile. Not in a, let's just rest in the arms of Jesus way, but let's walk the Jesus way. Jesus didn't travel that journey alone. He surrounded himself with a community. He included them even when they became betrayers and deniers, and loved them and depended on them to the very end. He also led them as a servant, as a friend, as a partner. He's the Messiah of the universe, and he's leading them as a servant. Later this week, he will wash their feet. He will break a loaf of bread and offer it to all of them, even those who are betraying and denying him. He will fill a cup with wine and offer it as salvation, not just to those gathered with him at the Passover meal, but to all the world. And invite all of us, thousands of years later, to celebrate that ritual of Holy Communion in remembrance of him, our servant king, the greatest leader the world has ever known, who defined leadership as service and love. So next time I remember my mom, I'm going to remember the many times she led our family with service and love. I heard some stories yesterday about Priscilla that so personified this. This woman who raised her 3 kids many years on her own, but not exactly on her own, leaning on her friend Judy, leaning on her beloved church choir, leaning on her church family, all the while serving and loving her family with such sacrificial love and yet strong leadership. A woman doesn't do that alone without being a strong, strong leader. I think about Bruce's wife, Judy, and all of the things she had to rise above with her disability, and then her advocacy for the disability community, and that beautiful picture of our mission team walking the trail, built and dedicated in her honor. Not because she was a kingly leader or a queenly leader, but because she was a servant leader. You see, we don't have to be Jesus to be a servant leader. We don't have to be running for political office or running a corporation to be a servant leader. We just have to let Jesus lead our lives as we lead our lives. And when we do so, we will find ourselves leading with love, leading in service, and leading this world to the beautiful place God intends for it to be and become. May it be said of us, they were servant leaders. Amen.